Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We're really happy you're here and look forward to spending the next hour together learning about the science of happiness. My name is Patty Rozakos and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager for Psychology at McGraw-Hill. Before we start, just want to review a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will run for approximately 1 hour with time for questions at the end. Your lines are muted, so please ask questions via the Q&A or chat windows. You don't need to wait until the end. You can send your questions as you have them and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and a link will be shared with you via email in a few days. That email will also include a survey link. Your feedback is important to us, so please take a moment to share your thoughts. We love hearing from you. Okay, let's get started. Our session today is about the science of happiness, and it's my pleasure to introduce our guest, Dr. Mark Holder. Mark is an associate professor at the University of British Columbia, where he studies positive psychology. His research team has identified factors that contribute to the happiness of vulnerable people, including children, people living in challenging regions of the world, and people with psychological challenges. Dr. Holder has published over 85 academic articles, which have been cited over 3,000 times, and is the co-author of the first Canadian edition of The Science of Psychology, an Appreciative View. He has given keynotes and invited talks on the science of happiness on his travels to over 50 countries. Today, we're happy to have him here with us. Welcome, Mark. I'll throw it over to you.
Thanks so much, Patty. And I really appreciate that generous introduction. And I'm really grateful for people that could join us for this. So though I'm one of the authors on the Science of Psychology and Appreciative View, I'm not going to say much about the textbook at all. I want to talk about the science of happiness. So let's start with a bit of background here. The healthcare fields, things like psychology, medicine, psychiatry, and neuroscience, have traditionally focused on what's wrong with you and how do we fix it. So we know a lot about deficits, disease, and dysfunction. And this is a really good thing. I'm not undercutting this at all. Because of this approach, psychology has been very fruitful in helping people, providing support for people who are depressed or anxious or who have neurodegenerative disorders. This is a really good thing. However, the study of deficits, disease, and dysfunction, to me, doesn't seem to encapsulate all that it means to be human. There's more to it than that. And so positive psychology represents that more. Positive psychology is not an antidote or a replacement for traditional psychology. Positive psychology is a complement to it. So in addition to focusing on what's wrong with you and how do we fix it, positive psychology focuses on what is right with you and how do we promote it. What's right with you? It's your ability to love and be loved by others. It's your curiosity and your love of learning. It's your compassion. It's your gratitude. And of course, it's your happiness. But we haven't done a very good job of focusing on it within the research and research literature. In my office, I've got this great big fat dictionary. It's called the Dictionary of Psychology. And in this dictionary, I checked out depression. So it turns out that depression has 18 different definitions. We know a lot about depression. So I also looked up happiness and I found that there are 0 definitions. It's like it's not even in the vocabulary of psychologists. Right now, if you go on PsycInfo, there's about 17 times more journal articles on depression than on happiness. And I don't begrudge the studies of depression. They're valuable, they're helpful, but I think the balance is kind of out of whack to me. So one of the things I wanted to do is convince you of the importance of the study of happiness, the study of well-being. After all, in our textbook, every single chapter, we have a section where we look at well-being. So why is the research on happiness important? Well, I put together a David Letterman's top 10 list to convince you of this. The first is that happiness is linked to improvements in the immune system. What I mean by that is in studies, they took undergraduates They tilted their heads back, stuck a tube down their schnozzes, and they dripped in the live rhinovirus. The rhinovirus is the virus that causes the common cold. It's what makes you sneeze. It gives you the scratchy throat. It gives you the congestion. So what happened? Well, this is not, this is like proving water's wet. The undergraduates got sick. But here's the interesting part of it. Those undergraduates who were happiest first were much less likely to catch the cold. And if they did catch the cold, the symptoms like sneezing were only half as severe. So happiness seemed to protect them. So I guess you could say that there's more to the relationship between sneezy and happy than we previously thought. And they repeated this study. But instead of the rhinovirus, they used influenza, the virus that causes the flu. Like, how on earth would you even get volunteers for this study? Well, they were paid pretty handsomely. And they got the same results. People who were happier prior to exposure to the virus were much less likely to catch the flu. And if they did catch the flu, the symptoms were less severe. So that's important. And it turns out the reason for that is the biological markers of the immune system, cytokines and killer T cells, show that the immunocompetence was enhanced in those people who are happy. And it's not just the immune system, it's overall health. Happy people visit the hospital less often. They're admitted to the hospital less frequently. They have fewer doctor's visits. They have fewer prescription drugs. And it's not just objective measures of happiness that are important. Subjectively, people who are happy, subjectively, they view themselves, they perceive themselves as healthier. And to some degree, how we see ourselves is critical to our well-being. Happiness is also linked to career success. So as a professor, like those professors listening here, if we get a paper accepted for publication, if we get a promotion, if we get tenure, if we get merit pay, success in our careers increases our happiness. That's true. But what's interesting is the reverse is true as well. People who are happy now show increased future career success. So one of your 19-year-old students who is happy now shows increased career success 7 years later when they're 26. People that are happy now in the future will get better job evaluations by their supervisors, by themselves. Happy people are more likely to get promotions and raises. Two people go for a job interview, same credentials, same education, same job experience. The happy person is more likely to get the job offer. Happy people are less likely to be unemployed. Happiness is linked to improved investment returns. This doesn't mean if you're happy, your stock portfolio will do better. I wish that was the case. I'm a pretty happy guy. But what it means is if your stock portfolio was focused on happy companies, you would do better. This is a study by a couple of graduate students in Sweden, and they put mock portfolios together made up of just the happiest companies, companies that made the top 100 list of the best places to work in Canada, or lists that say the most satisfied employees. And what they found is if you had invested in the happy companies, your rate of return would have been 2 to 4% each year better. So if your stock portfolio is chugging along at a healthy 7% annual rate of return, you could have got up to 11% with happy companies. And the difference between 7 and 11% compounded annually is ginormous. Happiness is linked to better relationships. We've shown that romantic relationships contribute to happiness, and happiness contributes to romantic relationships. The same is true for friendships as well. People that are happier have more higher quality friendships. Forgiveness is enhanced through happiness. If people are made happier experimentally, so you experimentally induce happiness, they're better able to forgive the transgressions of others. This is important because a failure to forgive others is linked to certain health concerns. In fact, people that are made happier are better able to forgive themselves for their own mistakes. Happiness is linked to increased tolerance, including racial tolerance. And I certainly think we live in an era where we could benefit from increased tolerance. It turns out when people are their happiness is experimentally induced, they show greater tolerance, including tolerance for others. Happiness is linked to increased creativity. We normally think of this as the other way around, that creativity is born from the tortured soul. Think of Sylvia Plath or other poets, that we think that the negative spawns creativity. But research has shown the opposite. They use something called an unusual uses task. This is a measure of creativity where people are given an item. The first item is often a brick. You have to think of how many different ways you can use a brick. Well, you could use a brick as a doorstop or as a paperweight. You could use a brick, because it's rough, to file down your nails. You could put a brick in the reservoir of your toilet, and by displacing water in the tank, you'll use less water each time you flush. You could use a brick as a message delivery system through the window of an ex-lover. So there's many different uses for a brick. What's interesting is when people's happiness was experimentally enhanced, their creativity was increased, including measured by the unusual uses task. Happiness is linked to a longer life. Happy people live longer. And this effect holds up even when you take into account things like diet, exercise, and smoking. Above and beyond those things, happiness allows you to live longer, about 7.2 years longer. It's a big effect. And remember, it's not just 7.2 years longer life, it's 7.2 years of happy life. Finally, happiness is linked to how we are judged by others, how others see us. Happy people are viewed as more physically attractive. They're viewed as more intelligent. They're viewed as more likable. Happy people are seen as more desirable friends. In one study, they found out that happy people were judged by others as more likely to get through the gates of heaven. So there's all sorts of advantages of happiness. Why should we care about it? Why did we emphasize it so much in our textbook? It's because pretty much everything you care about in life is linked to happiness. Your health, how long you're going to live, your relationships, your career success, your creativity are all linked to happiness. But mostly, happiness is important because we desire it. In a study of over 10,000 people from 5 different continents, when people were asked, what do you want? What's important to you? People said, especially in Canada, people said they wanted to be happy. And when people were asked, what do you want for your children? People said they wanted their children to have the latest iPhone. And they actually didn't say that, I just made that up. They said they wanted their children to be happy. But here's the rub. Until recently, as researchers, despite recognizing its importance, we've known very little about how to enhance happiness. of what we can do about it. So you can think of this talk as the do's and don'ts, evidence-based for happiness. And I'm going to start with the don'ts. What are things that are not going to contribute to your happiness? Well, money has an unusual relationship with happiness. Personal income has increased dramatically, including in Canada, over the last half century, along with the gross national product. For most of the people listening to this, you have more discretionary money than your grandparents had at this time of their life. Despite this increase in money, happiness hasn't budged much. Take a look at this graph here. If you focus on the red line, you should notice it has a steep upward slope. This represents personal income from the mid-1950s up to the year 2000. Now, statistically, I've removed the effects of inflation, so you can think of this as just buying power. And what it shows is we're doing well. Now, take a look at the green line. The green line represents the percentage of people who are very happy. It's at 33%. It doesn't matter what year we look at. So what I'm showing here is a disconnect between income and happiness. If we extended this graph into the 2000s and 2010s, we'd see a similar pattern that's even exaggerated. For mainland China, for example, the red line shows a really remarkably steep slope. China's done a really good job at increasing people's personal income over the last 12 or 15 years. What's happened to happiness in China? It's actually started to go down. So more money does not equal more happiness. So what if you won a lottery? On the weekend, I saw an advertisement that the 649 in Canada is valued at $8 million. If you won $8 million, if I won $8 million, would I actually be any happier? Are you kidding me? I promise you, if I win $8 million, I'm happier. Are you kidding me? $8 million? For $8 million, I could buy some new administrators at my university. $8 million? I could buy some new family members. You better believe I would be happier. And so would you for maybe 2 or even 3 months. Research shows that these increases in money have a very temporary boost on our happiness. In our own research, we looked at happiness and family income for children. Same story. Children are well aware of how rich their families are. So kids get it. Children rate or estimate their family's riches, and it correlates highly with the parents' tax returns. However, the amount of happiness, of children's happiness explained by family income is less than 1%. It really isn't much of a factor at all. However, most people are convinced the number one answer you get when you say, what'll make you happier? People say more money. Now, there's a caveat to this. Across Canada, more money results in more happiness for people from low income brackets. So if your family income is less than $75,000 a year, more money translates to more happiness. As you go from 40,000 to 50 to 60 to 70,000, there's increases in happiness. But once you get above 75,000 for family income, more money doesn't seem to be linked to more happiness. In fact, a new study showed that people who make more than $200,000 a year actually show a decrease in their happiness. I wondered about that. The people I know that make more than $200,000 a year are people that are really focused on their career, focused on their income, focused on making money. These are people who would not recognize their own children in a police lineup. So as a result of that, yeah, more money may actually create a happiness deficit. So if it's not money, what else might contribute to happiness? I'm glad this isn't a live audience because I asked people what the next topic is with my face transposed on this artwork. Sadly, nobody guesses. Happiness and beauty. It turns out beauty has many advantages. People that are judged by themselves and others as happier, as more beautiful, are judged as smarter. So beauty has an advantage on how others see us. People who are judged by themselves or others as beautiful have more job success. Two people go for an interview, a good-looking person and a less good-looking person. The good-looking person, even with the same resume, same experience, same education, the good-looking person is more likely to get the job and more likely to get promotions. This bias for attractiveness is true even of infants. So in a study, they took two groups of photos. In one group of photos, they took pictures of good-looking people. So imagine I have a stack of photos here of Brad Pitt and George Clooney. And over here, I have photos of me. I know it's a bit of a mystery, which is the good-looking group, isn't it? What they found is infants would spend more time looking at Brad Pitt and George Clooney photos than they would spend time looking at my beauty challenged mug. This is true even of chickens. Chickens will spend more time looking at attractive people than unattractive people. Clearly, there's an advantage to being beautiful. But does that advantage extend to happiness? Well, it turns out the link between happiness and beauty is really poor. They're not much correlated at all. Others have looked at this in adults. We've looked at it in children, and we found that happiness is not well predicted by beauty. An exception to this was a study done in London, England. They looked at a couple of dozen different job occupations, from veterinarians to supervisors to administrative assistants. And what they found out of all the careers they looked at, one career stood out: photo shoot models. People who are hired because they are so beautiful, because they are so attractive. And it's only at that uber attractive level that happiness and beauty are linked. But it's negatively linked. The models out of all the careers were the least happy people. What about age and happiness? Well, here I've put life satisfaction, which differs from happiness, but they're related. And I've looked at life satisfaction, plotted it from age 15 to post-retirement. Check out the height of the bars. They're all pretty similar. Life satisfaction doesn't change much with age. And you find a similar result with happiness, except there's a bit of a dip in happiness at the beginning of this curve for teenagers. There's also a bit of a dip for people that are about 42 years of age. And then there's an increase when people are 65 plus. If you maintain your health, good news is we've got the happiest years ahead of us to look forward to. This graph always reminds me of a long time ago. I was dating a woman, and her mother, in a rebellious act, her mother got a tattoo of a rose on her breast. And then she insisted on showing everybody this rose tattoo on her breast. I didn't want to see it, but she insisted. And the problem is that I think I'm funny. And so when she showed this to me in front of a crowd, I said, "Oh, that's a lovely rose. In a few more years, it'll be long stemmed." So that's the story of why I can't see her daughter anymore. But my point is that some things do change with age and gravity, but happiness and life satisfaction don't seem to be two of those. So let's look at those bundles of joy, happiness, and having children. How do they contribute to our soaring happiness? So this bar graph shows the happiness of married couples who don't have children. How much higher is that bar going to be for married couples with children? I'm sorry, bad news for you. It actually goes down. Now, this is a bit of a setup. This is husbands and wives with children after the children have left home. So you can think of this as the empty nest syndrome. What about husbands and wives with children, but the children are still living with them? Oh my God, it's even worse. Well, it's more nuanced than this. The media picked up on this simple story and concluded that children make us miserable. It's actually not that simple. It depends on many factors. If you have children after the age of 25, they don't seem to undermine your happiness at all. If you choose to have children as opposed to they are unplanned, if you choose to have them, if you plan for them, children don't undermine your happiness. If you have children in countries with governments with important social support, kids don't undermine happiness. Children aren't going to make you happier, but they're not going to make you miserable necessarily. In one study, they had people with an app on their phone twice a day at random days for 2 weeks. The app would summon them, and the people would say what they're doing, who they're with, and how happy they are. And it gave this sort of continuum. So when people were doing housework, they weren't happy at all. When people were with their friends, they were really quite happy. When people were with their spouse, they actually weren't as happy. They were pretty happy, but not as happy as when they were with their friends. And when were people happiest? When they were with their friends and their spouses. What about when you're with your children? Well, let's think about when you're with your children, when you're trying to nag them to finish their dinner or coax them into cleaning up their room or encouraging them to do their homework. Where does being with children fit on this scale? Well, being with your children in terms of happiness is somewhere between housework and grocery shopping. Being with your children is the happiness equivalent of commuting to work. So if it's not income, beauty, age, or having children, what does the research show does make us happy? We've now had just over 20 years of positive psychology, and we've synthesized the research down, and we now have an evidence-based answer for the secret of happiness, which I'm going to reveal now. I bet you're glad you came to this webinar, The Secret of Unhappiness Unveiled. If there's only one thing you do right now, if you employ just a single strategy, what's going to have the biggest impact on your happiness is this. The secret of happiness: choose your parents wisely. Now, let me explain why this is such great, terrific advice. Genetics plays an important role in happiness. Researchers have estimated that maybe around 30% of your happiness is attributed to your genetic inheritance. If you know the happiness of one identical twin, you can predict the happiness with a lot of certainty of the other identical twin, even when they're raised in separate households apart. But I mean, choosing your parents wisely, that's really not such great advice, is it? It's a little late for us to choose our biological parents. But my point is, if you're unhappy, it's not too late to blame your parents. Actually, that's not really my point, of course. My point is to look at this 30% number. If 30% of your happiness is attributed to your genetics, then this might be suggestive that up to 70% of your happiness is not fixed, that maybe there's things you can do about it. And research has demonstrated empirical ways that we can increase happiness. One of the first starts with your attitudes. We measured a host of people and we looked at how much they believed they could change their well-being. And there's a wide range. Some people thought there's nothing they could do to change their well-being. It was relatively fixed. Other people thought there's lots they can do, that they're in control and empowered. They can change their well-being. And people who thought they could change their well-being tended to be less depressed and less anxious. And people who thought they could change their well-being showed higher levels of happiness, and they were more likely to endorse methods that were ones that would increase their happiness. And when we switched this from a correlational study to an experimental methods, we kind of found pretty much the same thing. We found we could change people's mindsets. And if we changed them so they thought that they had more control and could change their well-being, this led to an increase in their well-being and a decrease in their ill-being. Other things that contribute to happiness, active leisure does. So going on holidays when we used to be able to do that, team sports and hobbies all are linked to increases in happiness. But which hobbies are best? Not all hobbies are created equal. In the 20 hobbies the researchers looked at, what they found out was the hobby that was linked to the lowest levels of happiness, the hobby that didn't help your happiness so much, was powerboating. And the hobby that increased happiness the most, the hobby that was linked to the highest levels of happiness, was gardening. This surprises me. I mean, I garden, but I don't really think of it as making me so happy. But I thought about this more. I live in British Columbia. And in British Columbia, many of my friends have gardens in their basements with the windows covered in aluminum foil. And these friends of mine seem really highly happy. And so maybe that's part of the secret. Passive leisure is also linked to happiness. People who watch more television, people who spend more time on the computer, people who spend more time on video games, these are linked to happiness, but they're negatively correlated. So spending more time in passive leisure tends to be associated with lower levels of happiness. Friends and family. What is their contribution to our well-being? I live in Kelowna. If you've been to the Okanagan Valley, you know it's got stunning weather, beautiful vistas. It's a lousy place. So at this time of the year, I get phone calls, I get emails from friends and family members saying, hey, can we come and stay at your house and enjoy skiing at Big White? In the spring, these so-called family and friends are phoning me up, emailing me and saying, hey, can we stay at your place for the golf season and the tennis season? In the summer, these users and so-called friends and family are saying, hey, can we come to your place, eat food out of your fridge and not replace it while we enjoy the summer and the lake and the beaches? And in the fall, these parasites are calling me and asking if they can stay at my place, break things in my house, not tell me they broke it, and then enjoy the fall wine festival. Do friends and family really make us happier? Well, Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, summarized it well. He said, hell is other people. Maybe he got it right, except the research shows absolutely clearly that that's not true. That a critical component of happiness is our relationship with others. It's almost impossible to find somebody that's happy who does not have meaningful friendships or meaningful relationships with family members or meaningful romantic relationship. Married people in almost every country are happier than non-married people. Children with more friends are happier. Even children's imaginary friends contribute to their happiness. People who have dementia often show a decrease in happiness, but if they're able to maintain their relationships with others, if their healthcare regime is not just controlled by institutions, but their family and friends chip in, they seem to be buffered against a decrease in happiness. We found this with people with acquired brain injury. People with brain damage typically show a decrease in happiness, but that decrease is much smaller for people with meaningful relationships. So here we have over a 16-year period, the happiness of married people shown by the red line. And the green line represents people who have never married. The red line always tends to be above the green line. Married people tend to be happier. What's interesting, though, is if instead of cutting this off at 1989, if you extend it for a few more decades, it turns out that the lines are starting to converge. There's less difference now than there used to be. And that's for two reasons. Married women are starting to report lower and lower levels of happiness. And single men are reporting higher levels of happiness. So Socrates summarizes this nicely for us. By all means, marry. If you get a good wife, you will become happy. And if you get a bad one, you will become a philosopher. So if you're now sitting there thinking, well, I've got 1,297 Facebook friends, one more piece of information that's important. Friendships are critical to your happiness, but it's not the quantity, it's the quality. So we're talking about these studies that show, can you list people that you can go to in a time of need, that you're excited about seeing, that you know you can trust? If you were diagnosed with a mental health setback, if you needed a ride to the airport at 6 a.m, are the people in your world that you can talk to, that you can trust, that you can rely on? 25 years ago, people could list an average of 3 individuals that they could count on. Now that we have Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram and now that we have all these platforms to connect with others, we've gone from a mere 3 people we have social connections to, all the way up to about 1.5. We've actually gone in the wrong direction. Interestingly, there's this gender difference here that I'd like to point out. When men are asked to name somebody they can trust, if they were diagnosed with a mental health issue, who they could talk to, men typically identify their wife, but are hard pressed to mention anybody else. Women do better. When women are asked to name people, they typically come up with 3 individuals, but they don't typically include their husbands on that list. So what have we learned here? We've learned that our family is critical to our well-being. We've learned that our friendships matter to our happiness. And we've learned that romance in all its different forms really matter to our well-being. So if our personal relationships are so important to our happiness, what can we do starting right now based on the research literature to nurture our personal relationships? Well, I have 5 things that you can do starting now that can help with that. The first is to ask questions and really listen to people you have relationships with. The research suggests that if you've been in a relationship for more than 3, certainly more than 6 months, you almost stop asking the other people questions. And when you do ask questions, you don't even listen for their replies. So what you want to do is bring into your conversation a couple of phrases. Phrases like, what happened next? And please tell me more. These are phrases that show you're engaged in what the other person's saying. It validates what they're saying. It says what you're saying is important. I want to hear it. And I don't want to just go on to my own story. People that use these types of phrases, ask questions and listening to their replies, nurture the relationships and report more satisfaction from their personal relationships. Never miss an opportunity to compliment others. So when I see if I go on a blind date and I meet the person at the door, I compliment her. I'll say, oh, that's a lovely outfit. It'll look so good on you when it comes back into style. Maybe that's not the best compliment. Compliments should be succinct. They should be authentic. They should be short and focus on a person's efforts and strategies. So compliment your children on their effort they put into a task. Compliment a coworker on how they addressed a conflict or used a new creative strategy to address a problem. Compliments nurture relationships. Never miss a chance to celebrate success. Social comparisons are toxic to our personal relationships. When we compare ourselves to others, it undermines our well-being. So at work, when somebody gets a promotion or merit pay, if I'm thinking, how come they got a promotion and merit pay? I've been here longer, I published more, I'm a great teacher. If I focus on that comparison, I'm going to be less happy. Instead of focusing on me, if I focus on them and their success, if I send them a congratulatory email or card, if I put a banner above their desk, if I buy them a cupcake with a candle in it, by celebrating the success of others, it'll enhance our personal relationships. Notice something different. This started in a study of football fans in the United States. Just finished with the football, of the Super Bowl. Football's a really big deal in the US. They took college football fans, so fans that had season tickets for at least 20 years to their team. And they measured the bond between the fan and the team. Then over the next 6 weeks, after 6 games, after each game, the fan had to notice something different. Like the team had different uniforms, used different formations, they had different cheers, they had different warm-up drills, they had some new plays. They noticed something different. Then the researchers remeasured the bond and found out it was a greater bond. There was a greater connection. The same thing happens with us. By noticing something different about your children, about your spouse, about your coworkers, your friends, by noticing something different and telling them you noticed it improves your relationship. And finally, use your smartphone smartly. In one study, what they did was they shut down social networking at an institute of technology. These are really plugged in students. And now all of a sudden, they couldn't use Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook. They didn't actually die. That's what the students expected. They couldn't even email. And what they found after a week is the students were sleeping better and were less stressed. It turned out it was stressful for the students to keep up on all these platforms. After 2 weeks, they found out they were eating better, exercising more, sleeping better, their grades improved, and they were happier. There's no mystery here. On average, Canadians are plugged into some device about 54 hours a week. When they had all this additional time, they could cook better food, exercise more, and had more time to sleep and study. I'm not asking people to throw out their smartphones or something, but I'm asking them to use them more judiciously. If we take Facebook, people who use Facebook passively, so they're just scrolling through to see the highlights of other people's lives and get their news feed, that undermines happiness. People that use their Facebook to interact and connect with others shows an increase in their happiness. So use your e-world to connect with others. I'm sure we can all imagine times when being plugged into devices actually can undermine our connections to others. So there's many different things that are connected to increase your happiness. I mentioned a few of these. I don't have time to go into all of these in this talk. This is just a slide to have McGraw-Hill invite me back for another talk because I got more to talk about. But I want us to go to the end of this list and focus on giving thanks, on gratitude. With several constraints, it's not as simple as just writing a gratitude list every day, but under certain constraints, people that feel and express gratitude also show increase in happiness. So let me take you back to the start of this talk. Patty gave me this lovely lovely introduction. And the first thing out of my mouth was to say, thank you, Patty. That was generous. I appreciate it. And then I thanked you all for attending this. Now, of course, part of what I was doing is I was trying to fool you to pretend I had some sort of social graces and social skills. But now you see more. Now you realize by giving thanks authentically, I was basically shamelessly promoting my own happiness. And so in that style, let me end in the same way I started, by saying with sincere gratitude to McGraw-Hill, thanks. To you attending, thanks. I really do sincerely appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mark. That was great. So if there are any questions, you can send them through now. And I did see a few come through, so we'll ask those now to you, Mark. And one of them came through near the beginning. It was when you were chatting about the definition of happiness. So I don't know if I'm going to ask it correctly. So if whoever typed this, if you want to type it back in to clarify, I don't know, you'd shared at the beginning, Mark, that there was no definition for happiness. So the question is, it'd be nice if you could tell us how you're defining happiness. So
Absolutely.
It could be for you, or it could be the definition, or it could be both, but I think it's a great question.
Though there isn't a definition in the Psychology of Happiness dictionary, we certainly have a definition we use for research. What we do is we think of well-being as an umbrella term. So well-being includes how you think about your life, the cognitive rating of your life, how well you think you're doing. That's life satisfaction. Happiness is how you feel you're doing, the affective rating of your life. That's happiness. And also a component of well-being includes negative emotions. We don't think we should get rid of negative emotions. We think that there's an important role for things like pain and loneliness and depression. They tell you when something's wrong and motivate you. So happiness is the affective rating of your life. But even within that, there's different types of happiness. So for example, we talk about hedonic happiness, which is the, you can think of, some people think of it as a more superficial happiness that comes from sensory pleasures, the hedonic life. Whereas eudaimonic happiness is a term that comes from Aristotle that looks at living the good life. You can think of it as more, maybe a more enduring, longer lasting happiness that Aristotle talked about that came from your connection with the community and doing right. So there's different types of happiness, and we have separate measures for each of those.
Thank you. Okay, there's a question here about students and someone saying that their students are stressed and anxious, and they're wondering what tactics you would recommend to help support students during everything that's happening with the pandemic specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's incredibly important. I mean, that's why we emphasized it so much in the textbook. Here's my unhelpful advice, because I often get, how can I become happy? How can I create more happiness for the people I care about, like our students? My truthful answer is, I don't have a clue. And I'm supposed to be an expert on happiness, and that's a really unsatisfying answer. But the reason I don't know is there's not one size fits all technique that's going to work for everybody. Having said that, there are some approaches that I think I would use. First of all, you can discuss the lecture that shows people can indeed increase their happiness. By doing that, it creates a mindset in students showing that they have control and can make a difference. Second thing that's really important is let them know that physical exercise increases happiness more than people anticipate. It gives you bigger bang for the buck than we think. Recognizing beauty in nature, that kind of wow factor is important, but it needs to be mindful. It's not the amount of time you spend in nature, that it's how you spend it. So take out the earbuds and actually be focused on what brings emotions, what evokes emotions from you in nature, and nurture your personal relationships in the ways I said. And of course, these things can be combined. So for me, during this time of year, I can be out cross-country skiing. So I'm getting physical exercise while I'm engaging with others, while I'm enjoying the beauty of nature, and I can combine these things together to really increase the happiness I derive from it.
Thank you. Hey, when you or your spouse has a chronic illness, what changes in terms of happiness techniques? Do you have any, would some of those change some of the strategies that you shared earlier?
Yeah, I have some bad news about this, and there's so many things that we experience where our happiness bounces back from. And so even in severe cases, like if you've got you've lost a limb, or when you have severe poverty, our happiness really bounces back from these things. That's the good news. Happiness is really quite resilient. The bad news I have is if you're a full-time caregiver for somebody who has a chronic disease or is at an end-of-life stage, I don't have a good story for you. That is one of the things that shows a decrease in happiness, and it's an enduring decrease in happiness. So during that time, if you are that caregiver, or for the person who is struggling with those physical setbacks, in that situation, what's critical is that you have respite time and that you and that other person are able to connect to others. That's probably the single most important thing you can do, is maintain your relationships with others.
Thank you, Mark. We have time for just a couple of more because we're coming up to 2 Eastern. If couples who have children are less happy, why is having relationships with family, presumably with children, linked to higher levels of happiness?
That's an important question. And remember how I phrased it is that it's not necessarily the case that children are going to undermine our happiness. But it also depends on, it goes back to the first question on the definition of happiness. Well-being has many different components, and I don't think we should govern our lives exclusively on the pursuit of happiness. Other things matter. Things like life satisfaction, things like contentment, things like momentary joy. And so our relationships in having children, though they may not always give us happiness, they do contribute to other things. For example, one of the things they contribute is for us to have meaning in life. And meaning in life creates happiness and well-being. And by having children, it's a way, by being a parent, you have a built-in system, a built-in meaning in your life. And in that way, children contribute positively to our well-being.
Thank you, Mark. And just one more, because we're coming up to the end, is can you be too happy? Is there such a thing as having too much happiness?
Yeah, if we look at different components, it's so often the case that you can have too much of a good thing. For example, people that are optimists have all sorts of advantages, living longer, better health, and all this. But people who are extraordinarily optimistic die sooner. And it's because when you're super optimistic, you take unnecessary risks is part of the reason. Happiness doesn't seem to be in that category. The research suggests that more is better, and it's not the case that you can overdose from happiness.
That's great. Thank you. So we're unfortunately running out of time. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you, Mark, for leading this really interesting session about the science of happiness. And thanks to all of you as well for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. You'll receive an email soon that'll include a link to the recording, as well as some evidence-based strategies that Mark had shared on how to enhance your personal relationships. The email will also include a survey link and some information about our resources for psychology, including our newest resource for intro psych called The Science of Psychology and Appreciative View. We'd love to hear your feedback about the session today, so please take a few moments to fill out that survey. And should you have any questions at all about the session or about our resources, feel free to reply to any of the webinar emails that you've received. They come to me and I'm happy to respond, or you can connect directly with your local account manager. So on behalf of the team at McGraw-Hill, thanks again for joining us and hope you have an amazing day. Bye.